Have you ever wondered what happens inside the mind of an orc, if a creature born for endless war can ever feel something deeper than rage, louder than violence, older than the galaxy itself? It is in this question that our story begins, not with a battle, not with a roar, but with a strange, unsettling silence that even the orcs themselves could not explain. The silence settled over a moon drenched in perpetual red dusk, a place orcs called Gutsmasha. It was a world where even the dirt seemed to vibrate from distant engines and the bones of old wars lay half-buried like broken teeth. Yet on this night, everything felt paused, as if some unseen force had placed a massive hand over the entire world and commanded it to shut up. In this silence, a single orc stood awake when he shouldn't have. His name, if an orc can truly be said to have a name, was Grimdark. He was bigger than most, meaner than all, and so dense with muscle and brutality that other orcs often joked he was made out of scrap metal instead of flesh. But Grimgut was troubled. That alone was strange. Orcs were not meant to be troubled. They were meant to yell, smash, build, shoot, burn, conquer, and then yell some more just because they liked the sound of their own shouting. But Grimgut couldn't shout tonight. Something held his jaw shut, something older than instinct, older than the hunger for war, and older than whatever passed for his thoughts. It was curiosity, a feeling orcs normally crushed with the nearest heavy object. He stared up at the sky, watching the crimson clouds slowly drift across a distant star, and for the first time in his brutal, simple existence, he felt something like a question forming in the back of his skull. It scratched at him like a grot with a rusted blade. It whispered to him like a wounded squig crawling under his armor. The question was small, soft, and terribly wrong for a creature like him. Why am I awake? Why do I feel like something is coming? Why does the world feel scared? Grimgut did not like this sensation. He could tear apart a tank with his bare hands, rip the head off a knob twice his size, and laugh while doing it. But he couldn't punch a question. He couldn't shoot it. He couldn't even yell at it properly. The unease sat in him like unexploded ordnance, humming with slow, dangerous energy. His heart thumped the way drums might thump before a massive Waagh, but there was no Waagh gathering. No warboss rallying the mobs. No mechs shouting about new kill machines. Only that horrible silence. He wandered through his camp, each heavy step crushing metal scraps beneath his boots. Usually, the camp was a chaotic festival of noise, orcs arguing, orcs fighting, orcs building things that exploded immediately and then celebrating the explosion. But tonight, even the loudest brutes slept uneasily. Some twitched, others growled. One particularly massive orc gnawed on empty air, as though dreaming of biting the moon itself. None of them woke, none of them sensed the shift. Only Grimgut. The air tasted wrong, too cold, too thin, not enough smoke, not enough oil, not enough blood. He sniffed the wind again, snorting like some mechanical beast warming up its engines. Something distant trembled through the ground. Not footsteps, not explosions, not anything he recognized. It didn't feel like war. It felt like something watching. Something that had never taken interest in orcs before. Grimgut clenched his massive fists, the metal plates of his armor groaning under the pressure of his strength. He hated thinking. He hated sensing things he shouldn't sense. Orcs weren't made for this. They were made for destruction, not dread. Yet dread curled up inside him like smoke inside a broken engine. He wanted to smash it. But all he could do was stand there, listening to the quiet breathing of 1,000 sleeping warriors, and wonder why he alone remained awake. A faint whisper drifted across the barren fields beyond the camp, so soft that it barely registered. It didn't sound like a voice, not truly. It was more like the memory of a sound, something ancient that had survived too many millennia and worn itself down into a single fragile thread. It tugged at Grimgut's thoughts, pulling him toward the edge of the camp, toward the wasteland where nothing should exist except the ruins of battles long finished. His instinct screamed at him to ignore it. His muscles tensed, urging him to turn around and wake someone else, anyone else, to share the burden of this horrible, crawling sensation. But Grimgut did something no sane orc would ever do. He followed the whisper. The dread grew heavier with each step, but so did something else, something impossible. Something that orcs were not supposed to possess. Awareness. Something was coming. Something that did not fear the orcs, and worse, something the orcs might not be able to fight. And Grimgut, the biggest brute on Gutsmasha, whispered a single question to the dark, a question that even he didn't understand. What if this ain't a normal night? The wasteland stretched before Grimgut like an open wound, jagged and silent beneath the blood-colored sky. The wind that usually carried the oily stench of burnt fuel now moved with an eerie stillness, brushing lightly across the cracked ground as though afraid to disturb whatever lurked beyond sight. Grimgut sniffed again, more cautiously than he had ever sniffed anything in his life. No smoke, no gunpowder, no fires, no squigs, nothing smelled right. It was the absence of life that struck him hardest, the suffocating quiet that pressed down on his ears like a heavy fist. Orks were creatures born of chaos. Silence was their enemy, more unsettling than any battlefield. He trudged forward, each footfall sinking into dust that seemed older than memory itself. The whisper that had drawn him this far pulsed through the air like a hidden tremor, subtle yet irresistible. It did not speak words, not in any way an orc would understand, but it tugged at him as surely as gravity. Something ancient was calling, something that had no place in the brutal simplicity of orc existence. Grimgut frowned harder, trying to force the strange sensation away, but his thoughts kept circling back. Orcs were not meant to think. The smartest of them were the mechs, and even their thinking was mostly about how to make something explode more spectacularly. Yet here he was, trudging alone through a silent wasteland in the middle of the night, following a whisper that made his skin tighten under his armor. Every instinct screamed at him to bellow a war cry, to awaken everything around him through sheer force of noise, to drown out the whisper with the comfort of violence. But something deep in his bones stopped him. He felt, watched. The sensation crawled up his spine like a mechanical spider, tapping cold legs along each vertebra. Grimgut spun around, his massive bulk twisting with surprising speed, but he saw nothing, only endless red dusk and the faint shimmer of heat rising from the ground. His hand tightened around the hilt of his choppa. The weapon hummed faintly, as if eager for use, but Grimgut remained motionless, listening. The whisper came again, closer now. A soft, dragging sigh, like a dying engine taking its last breath. Grimgut's tusks bared instinctively, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Show yourself," he muttered, though even he wasn't sure whether he spoke the words aloud or only thought them. The whisper answered not with a sound but with a feeling, an overwhelming surge of loneliness, ancient and suffocating. It pressed against his mind like a weight, squeezing, probing, searching for something within him. Grimgut snarled and shook his head violently. He did not understand what was happening, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity: something out there wanted him. Not the other orcs, not the camp, him. The realization stoked a spark of anger within his gut. No one called an orc and expected them to come quietly. If something wanted him so badly, it could come out and face him head on. That was how things were done. That was the orky way. But the whisper didn't obey. It flowed around him like mist, circling him silently, drifting closer. For the first time in his brutal, chaotic life, Grimgut felt as though he was prey. He hated that feeling more than anything. He stomped forward, driven by a mixture of fury and something unsettlingly close to fear. The whisper retreated, or perhaps it guided, he could not tell. But the pull grew stronger, leading him toward a jagged ravine carved deep into the moon's crust, a wound that glowed faintly with eerie green luminescence. Grimgut had never seen anything like it. The glow shimmered like the reflection of a distant star trapped beneath the earth, pulsing rhythmically as though the land itself had a heartbeat. Orcs feared few things, but even they respected the strange, unpredictable power of hidden green light. The glow reminded Grimgut of the weird boys, mad, unstable psychers whose heads sometimes exploded with the force of their own power. It reminded him of the strange things lurking in the warp, things orcs preferred to ignore by smashing everything they saw. But the glow here felt different. Older, colder. It had no warmth, no energy. Just a silent pulse, calling him down. The whisper drifted upward from the ravine, stroking the edges of his mind like icy fingers. Deeper, closer, come. Grimgut spat in defiance, the thick glob sizzling slightly as it struck the glowing rocks. His instincts roared at him to back away, to turn around and return to the comforting chaos of the camp. But another part of him, something buried deep, something that had always been there but never awakened, urged him forward. A question beat in his skull, louder and louder. What if I'm supposed to see what's down there? He gripped his choppa tighter, the metal creaking under the pressure of his enormous hand. His breath deepened, his muscles coiled, and with a growl that sounded almost like a challenge to the darkness itself, Grimgut stepped toward the ravine's edge. The ground trembled in response. Something below stirred, and the whisper, for the first time, formed a single clear thought, one word that chilled even an orc's blood. Welcome. Grimgut's eyes narrowed as he peered into the ravine, the eerie green glow casting jagged shadows across his scarred armor. The edges of the pit were sharp, dangerous, but he did not hesitate. Something primal, something beyond his understanding, pulled him forward. The whisper no longer circled him, it was beneath him now, coming up from the depths like a current dragging him closer. Orks were not hunters of the unseen, they were predators of the known, the loud, the tangible. But this was different. This was older, and it was waiting. He stepped cautiously onto the first rocky ledge, his massive boots scraping against stone that felt impossibly old. Each step echoed unnaturally, bouncing off unseen walls deep within the ravine. The glow intensified as he descended, turning from a faint shimmer to a pulsating luminescence that made the air itself seem alive. Grimgut's tusks clenched. The air smelled wrong, not rotten, not burnt, not even like blood. It smelled like metal left out in a storm for centuries, cold and empty, and it filled his lungs with something that made his chest tighten. The whisper grew louder, not in sound, but in feeling. A rhythm, slow and deliberate, like the breathing of a creature so massive it could crush moons with a single exhale. It filled the ravine with presence, and Grimgut felt his instincts fight against it. Fight, smash, run. His orky brain screamed, but the other voice, quieter and older, urged him deeper. See, no, survive. As he moved further down, strange shapes began to emerge in the shadows. At first, they were barely perceptible, jagged silhouettes, twisted forms that could have been rocks or broken machinery. But as he drew closer, the forms sharpened into something almost recognizable, broken armor plates, fragments of weaponry, remnants of orc skulls long dead. They were strewn along the cavern floor like trophies, not of recent battles but of something far older, something the orcs had never touched. The green light traced their edges, making them gleam like eyes in the dark. Grimgut's breath came in heavy huffs. He had fought horrors before, Xenos, heretics, even the occasional demons, but nothing prepared him for the weight of this. This was not alive in the way he understood life. It was aware, and it was patient. It had been waiting. A low vibration ran through the ground, subtle but undeniable. Grimgut's fingers tightened around his choppa, feeling the hum beneath his boots. The whisper sharpened again, forming more than just words now. Shapes of thought, images unbidden, flickered in his mind. Endless battles, burning skies, the bones of worlds cracked open, the wails of creatures too large to comprehend. And always, at the center, a green glow, pulsating, patient, inexorable. Grimgut felt a pulse of rage rise up in his chest. Orks did not like being watched. Orks did not like being toyed with. They conquered, they destroyed, they laughed while doing so. Yet now, the rage was tinged with fear, a foreign, unpleasant taste that made him snarl and grind his tusks. Something down here had the power to bend even an orc's instincts. It could wait, it could plan, it could see. Then, without warning, the whisper became a voice, low and metallic, resonating directly in his mind. Grimgut Dakama, it said his name like it had known it for centuries. The hairs on his neck bristled. Orks did not respond to names spoken from nowhere. Names were given by clan, by warboss, by brutality, not by unseen, ancient voices. Yet the sound vibrated inside him, echoing across bone and steel, pressing him to move faster, to descend further, to confront what waited at the heart of the ravine. The green glow swirled below him, forming a pool of light that shimmered like liquid metal. Its surface rippled unnaturally, and for the first time, Grimgut saw movement within. Something alive, or something that had once been alive, shifted beneath the light. He could not tell what it was, but he sensed power, intelligence, and cruelty. A force older than any orc warboss, more patient than any strategy, hungered quietly for him to reach the bottom. Grimgut's claws scraped the stone as he lowered himself carefully. Each movement seemed to amplify the presence beneath. The glow pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, and he realized with a shock that it had been sinking with him all along, measuring him, testing him, learning him. And then, as he reached the final ledge, the surface of the green pool shimmered violently, and a shape rose from within. Not a shape he could name, not a form that made sense to his brutal orc mind. It was jagged, massive, alien, and undeniably alive. Eyes, or something like them, opened, glowing in the green light, fixating on him with a hunger that felt like it could consume stars. Grimgut felt a thrill of pure orc excitement surge through him, tangled with the gnawing terror of the unknown. He had fought monsters before, but nothing like this. It was bigger, older, and smarter. And yet, The voice in his head whispered again, "Come closer, Dakama. Face me." The decision was his. Step back and retreat into the comforting chaos of his camp, or descend fully into the unknown, into the heart of something that defied all Orky understanding. Grimgut's muscles tensed, his tusks clenched. He roared, a roar that seemed too small, too human, in the presence of the thing before him. And with the weight of curiosity, fury, and dread driving him, he stepped forward, leaving the safety of ledges behind, plunging toward the green, pulsating heart of the ravine. Grimgut's boots struck the floor of the ravine with a thunderous echo, yet the sound was immediately swallowed by the green glow that bathed everything in an unnatural, sickly light. He raised his choppa instinctively, muscles coiled like a spring, eyes scanning the shifting, alien shapes before him. Whatever lived, or lingered, here was unlike anything he had ever faced. It did not breathe like a creature. It did not smell like a creature. It moved in a rhythm older than life itself, its form shifting and pulsing like the marrow of dead worlds stirred to unholy animation. The voice in his head spoke again, clearer this time, metallic and patient. "Grimgut Dakama, do you understand yet what waits for you?" Grimgut's tusks bristled in instinctive anger. Orks did not bow to whispers. Orks did not hesitate. Orks smashed. He roared, swinging his massive choppa in a wide arc, as if the sheer force of his will could tear reality itself. The swing met nothing solid, yet the green light rippled violently as though the motion had struck something far larger, far more aware than himself. The air around him vibrated, pressing against his ears, twisting his thoughts with the pressure of impossibility. A deep, resonant vibration rolled through the ravine. The green glow expanded outward, flowing across the floor and licking at the jagged walls, turning them almost fluid. Shapes emerged, massive, incomprehensible, angular, but moving with a consciousness that defied reason. Grimgut's instincts screamed at him to fight, yet he realized something terrifying. This was not just a fight for his body. It was a fight for his mind. The entity's presence filled him, not like heat or cold, not like air or fire, but like memory. Memories that were not his own surged through his skull, visions of worlds torn apart, of orc fleets burning beneath impossible skies, of whispers and secrets older than the Imperium. He felt the weight of centuries pressing down, and for the first time, the brutal certainty of Orky strength seemed inadequate. Grimgut bellowed again, a sound that was half defiance, half disbelief. "I don't care who you is. I smash, I fight, I win." Yet the presence did not flinch. It did not respond with violence. It waited, patient and immense, studying him like a child examining a dangerous toy. A flash of understanding, or perhaps a trick of the alien light, struck him. The glow did not merely illuminate the entity. It defined it. Each pulse revealed a vast, jagged form, its edges impossible to trace, yet undeniably sentient. It was a predator not in the physical sense, but in the metaphysical one. It hunted thought, hunted courage, hunted awareness itself. And it had chosen him. Why me? Grimgut thought, though the thought felt alien, too small, too fragile for the weight of what confronted him. The voice, or whatever it was, answered without words, "Because you are awake. Because you think. Because you wonder." The orc's instinctual fury collided with this impossible patience. He swung his choppa again, harder this time, letting raw strength flow through the weapon, willing the green glow to respond with impact. The air distorted, shimmering violently, and a wave of energy surged outward, hurling him backward across the cavern floor. He slammed against the jagged walls, breath stolen from his lungs, armor dented but body intact. And then he understood. This was not a being that could be beaten with fists or weapons. This was something that existed beyond the normal rules of combat, beyond the galaxy's simple truths of firepower and brutality. It had waited for centuries for something like him, an orc who could question, who could see, who could face what others would never comprehend. Grimgut rose, eyes burning, tusks gritted, muscles trembling, not from fear, not from pain, but from exhilaration. A challenge had been issued, not in words, not in sound, but in the very marrow of his existence. And Orks did not back down. With a roar that shook the ravine, Grimgut charged. This time, he did not swing blindly. This time, he let instinct, curiosity, and unshakable Orky will guide him. The green glow pulsed faster, the entity moving in patterns that defied logic, and yet with every step, Grimgut felt his mind stretching, bending to meet it. The first real contact happened not with metal on flesh, but with thought on thought. The presence lashed at him with memories and sensations not meant for any living creature, crushing, probing, twisting. Pain, confusion, and exhilaration collided inside his skull, threatening to break him. Yet with a guttural, defiant yell, he anchored himself to what he was, a being of chaos, a destroyer, a survivor. He would not yield. He could not yield. And in that moment, Grimgut realized the terrible truth: this was not merely a fight for survival. This was the birth of something new. Something brutal. Something orky. Something that would change him, and perhaps all orcs, forever. The green light twisted around Grimgut, searing and cold at once, as though the ravine itself had become a living thing intent on breaking him. Every pulse of the glow carried images of war, fire, and destruction, things he had lived, things he had fought, things he had never dared to imagine. And at the center of it all, the entity revealed itself not fully, but enough for the orc's mind to sense its magnitude, jagged, immense, a being of thought and hunger, older than any orc memory, yet bound to the same galaxy. Grimgut's tusks clenched, and a roar tore from his chest, echoing violently across the cavern. "I ain't scared, I fight, I smash." The words were a vow, a declaration of existence against impossibility. The entity responded, not with attack, but with awareness, waves of thought washing over him, probing, testing, folding his mind into itself like a grotesque tapestry of possibilities. Pain struck first, then memory, then visions of futures that should not exist. And yet, in the center of the storm, Grimgut felt something awaken, a spark of comprehension, a brutal clarity. It was a challenge, not of fists or metal, but of will. The entity demanded recognition, demanded that Grimgut see beyond instinct and rage, to confront the very essence of himself. Orcs were meant to destroy without question, but Grimgut's mind, for reasons even he could not understand, pushed back. Thought met thought, fury met patience, chaos met calculation. Every roar he bellowed sent ripples of resistance through the entity, every swing of his massive arms, every pounding step, anchored him to reality and defiance. And then the entity spoke, not in words, not in whispers, but as a vision. Countless orcs, slaughtered, yet their spirits unbroken, worlds burning, yet some spark remained, the galaxy as it had always been, brutal, chaotic, and alive. You could join, Grimgut Dakama, the presence seemed to hum, or you could endure. Grimgut roared again, feeling the fire of his ancestors, the fury of every battle he had survived. "I ain't joinin' no one. I smash, I live, I win." And in that instant, the entity recoiled, not defeated, but fascinated. It had not encountered resistance like this in millennia. Here was an orc who did not merely survive. He challenged thought itself with instinct, fury, and unyielding will. The green light pulsed violently, almost like a heartbeat, and Grimgut felt the crushing pressure of eons pressing in. Memories, visions, sensations, everything attempted to overwhelm him. Pain, fear, doubt, all tried to bend him. And yet he smiled, tusks bared, muscles taut, chest heaving. He embraced it, let it crush him, let it challenge him, let it teach him what survival meant beyond fists and bullets. The entity paused, as if acknowledging the orc's defiance. For the first time, it allowed a form to settle, a jagged, immense silhouette that seemed to bend reality around itself. It was horrifying, alien, and magnificent. And it extended an invitation in the only language Grimgut could understand: power through challenge, survival through defiance. Grimgut understood, and he chose. He roared, louder than he ever had in his life, louder than any battlefield could contain, "I ain't scared. I fight me own way." And the green glow fractured, splintering across the ravine like shattered teeth, yet leaving a pulse of warmth, small, but undeniably real. The entity receded, not vanquished, but respectful. It had tested him, and he had endured. Exhausted, bloodied, but unbroken, Grimgut rose to his full height. His mind throbbed with the weight of what he had seen, but his spirit burned brighter than ever. The ravine was silent again, the green glow dimming to a soft shimmer, as if acknowledging the orc who had faced the unimaginable and survived. He realized that some battles were never meant to be fought with weapons alone. Some were fought in the mind, in courage, in defiance. And he had won. A question lingered in the back of his skull, sharper now than ever: what else waits out there? And for the first time, Grimgut smiled, not because he had answers, but because he had survived the questions. And he knew, deep in his bones, that whatever came next, he would meet it head-on, with claws, teeth, and the unstoppable force of an orc who refused to bow. Grimgut emerged from the ravine as the first faint tendrils of red dusk began to fade into a deeper, shadowed darkness. The world seemed unchanged, yet he knew it was irrevocably different. The camp was quiet, the orcs still sleeping, oblivious to the cosmic trial their biggest, meanest brute had just endured. He looked at the familiar chaos of scorched earth, scattered armor, and broken war machines, and felt a strange separation from it all. The orcs had not seen what he had seen, and perhaps they never would. They could not feel the weight of a presence that bent thought and reality alike. Only he had endured it, and it had left its mark deep inside him, woven into his consciousness like a pulse beneath his skull. Every step back toward the camp reverberated in his body, echoing memories of the green glow, the impossible forms, the whispers that had sought to bend him. Pain and exhaustion weighed him down, yet exhilaration surged with equal intensity. He had survived, but survival alone was not the reward. The encounter had carved something into him, something primal, something cunning, something that merged orc instinct with a sliver of awareness no other orc possessed. As he rejoined the slumbering horde, a new sense of vigilance coursed through him. He could feel the faint traces of the entity still lingering in the air, like the last echo of a distant drumbeat. Pulsing softly in rhythm with his own heartbeat. The green glow had faded, but the whisper, the memory of it, remained, a quiet hum in the back of his mind. Grimgut knew it would never leave him entirely. Some things, once encountered, leave indelible marks, and he was now a bearer of one such mark. He crouched beside a snoring knob, staring into the red-tinged horizon. The familiar chaos of orc life, the arguments, the squabbles, the random explosions, felt both comforting and distant. He was still Grimgut Dakama, the same brute who smashed, bellowed, and conquered, but now something new had joined him, the knowledge that the universe held forces beyond mere strength, beyond mere brutality. And while he did not understand them fully, he had faced them, endured them, and emerged more dangerous than ever. The camp would awaken soon. There would be fighting, shouting, laughter, the endless hunger for destruction. Grimgut would join them, as he always had, but with a new edge in his mind, a sharper awareness. The whisper would return one day, perhaps stronger, perhaps testing him in ways he could not yet imagine. And when it did, he would be ready. For now, he lay back among the horde, tusks bared in a grin, eyes half closed against the fading light. The green glow was gone, but its presence lingered in his mind, a reminder that the galaxy was far older, far stranger, and far more dangerous than even the wildest orc could dream. And Grimgut Dakama, the brute who faced the impossible and lived, felt something he had never felt before, a restless curiosity, coiled like a spring in his chest, waiting for the next whisper, the next trial, the next impossible challenge. And somewhere, in the unseen depths of the universe, the entity watched and waited, patient as ever, knowing that the seed it had planted in the mind of an orc would one day grow into something both brutal and uncontainable. Grimgut smiled again. Sleep would not come easily tonight, but he did not mind. The galaxy was full of questions, full of whispers, full of battles yet to be fought. And he was ready for all of them. Because some orcs are born to smash, some are born to lead, and some are born to endure the impossible. Grimgut lay among the sleeping orcs, yet sleep refused him. His body ached from exertion, but it was the mind that burned. Memories of the green glow, the jagged forms, the impossible pulse of awareness, it all lingered like a scent that could not be washed away. He turned his head slightly, observing the familiar forms of his clan, each one deep in dreamless slumber, oblivious to what he had faced. Orcs were simple in their brutality, but simplicity could not protect them from the universe's deeper, older horrors. He wondered if any other orc could have endured it. Maybe a knob or a warboss, someone cunning and strong, but Grimgut knew it was something else that had chosen him. It was not just strength. It was endurance, curiosity, and defiance. The kind of defiance that burned in orcs in rare flashes, but only a few could sustain long enough to stand before the impossible and survive. The whisper, though gone in sound, had left traces. Tiny pulses of it returned now and then, like echoes of some distant engine that the mind could almost hear if it listened closely. It reminded him of the cosmos beyond orc sensibilities, a universe where not everything could be smashed, not every problem solved by brute force, and not every enemy faced with raw aggression. There were beings older than the stars, forces that measured thought as easily as movement, and now Grimgut understood, in a way no orc should, that survival sometimes demanded more than strength, it demanded awareness. He thought of the green glow and the things beneath it. The entity had not attacked him outright, had not tried to crush him physically. Instead, it had tested him, measured him, and left him changed. He felt something strange swelling in his mind, an awareness coiled inside him, patient and restless. It was dangerous, yes, but also exhilarating. It meant that he could feel the universe's hidden layers, glimpse what most orcs could never perceive. And that meant that when the next Waagh rolled across the stars, when the next enemy appeared, Grimgut would not just smash blindly. He would know, just enough to survive. The camp began to stir in small ways. A knob rolled over, a few groaned, a squig let out a squeal. But none of them noticed the pulse of something greater that lingered in the shadows, touching only Grimgut's mind. He stood slowly, testing his muscles, stretching out the pain. Even exhausted, even shaken, he felt stronger, not just in body, but in something deeper, something primal. He had faced the impossible, and it had not defeated him. Yet curiosity nagged. The entity's presence had not vanished. It had retreated, yes, but it had left an imprint. A promise, or a warning, Grimgut could not tell which. And he realized with a thrill that the galaxy had more secrets than he could smash, more dangers than he could fight, and more whispers than he could ignore. Each would call to him in its own way, and each would demand that he be ready. He moved through the camp silently, observing the sleeping orcs, and wondered, would they understand if he told them? Could they comprehend the trial he had faced, the test that had changed him? No, they were orcs, simple and loud, meant to live in chaos, not in thought. And maybe that was best. Let them sleep, let them fight, let them conquer. Grimgut would carry the memory alone, a secret forged in green light and ancient awareness. And somewhere, far beyond the horizons of orc perception, the entity lingered. Watching, waiting, patient, it knew that Grimgut's mind had been awakened, and that this small, brutal creature had glimpsed a sliver of something far older and far stranger than any battlefield. That was enough, for now. Grimgut grinned again, tusks flashing in the dimming light. Sleep would come eventually, but for tonight, the stars felt heavier, the darkness deeper, and the galaxy wider. And he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that nothing, not fire, not metal, not even other orcs, could prepare him for what lay ahead. The whispers would return, and next time, Grimgut would meet them, ready to endure, ready to fight, and ready to survive the impossible once more. Because some orcs smash, some orcs led, and some orcs face the impossible in live. The moon of Gutsmasha was silent once more, but silence in orc worlds was never truly empty. Beneath the red-hued dusk, the scars of countless battles marred the landscape, craters where squads had clashed, shattered war engines rusting in the wind, and the skeletal remains of old Warbosses trophies half buried in the jagged terrain. Grimgut walked among them, each step heavy but measured, his mind still coiled with the memories of the green glow and the ancient presence he had faced. This place was no ordinary battlefield, it was a monument to orc fury, a cathedral of chaos that had seen millennia pass in endless cycles of war. Even the ground seemed to remember the brutality, vibrating faintly under his boots. Grimgut realized that Gutsmasha itself had been a witness to something greater than mere orky violence, something that had shaped the moon in ways subtle yet profound. He had faced one such force, but there were others, lurking, patient, waiting for those who dared to notice. The orcs slept, unaware, but the galaxy had eyes that were older, colder, and sharper than any knob's gaze. And now, Grimgut carried a spark of awareness that made him dangerous in a way no other orc could understand. He wandered to the edge of a crater where half a Grot tribe had been lost generations ago. The bones of their machines gleamed faintly in the moonlight, and Grimgut's mind, unaccustomed though it was, drew connections between the present and the past. These deaths were not meaningless, they were echoes, lessons written in destruction and fire. And somehow, he knew, the whispers, the entity, had been part of that too, testing, measuring, choosing those it would challenge. The orc horde stirred as the first signs of activity returned to the camp. Wakes of firelight flickered from crude braziers, and muffled grunts and mutters began to rise. Yet Grimgut moved among them with a newfound detachment. He had seen beyond the immediate, beyond the smashed skulls and broken guns, to the truths that lay beneath, that the galaxy was vast, cruel, and patient, and that some forces could not be met with strength alone. This realization, dangerous as it was, sharpened him, made him more unpredictable, more lethal, not just in body, but in mind. He paused atop a jagged ridge, looking out at the horizon where distant moons and shattered planets glimmered faintly. The whisper returned, almost imperceptible, like a faint vibration in the air, tugging at the edges of his thoughts. Grimgut did not fear it anymore. He recognized it as a challenge, a puzzle, a force that tested the limits of his existence. And the thought thrilled him. He had survived, endured, and emerged stronger. And in this survival, he glimpsed the future of orcs, not just as destroyers, but as participants in a galaxy that demanded cunning as well as brutality. The red winds of Gutsmasha swept across his face, carrying the scent of rust, scorched metal, and distant fires. Each gust seemed to whisper a warning. The universe was patient, the galaxy old, and the horrors eternal. And yet, Grimgut felt ready, in ways no other orc could ever understand. The horde would fight, conquer, and bellow their war cries, oblivious to the deeper currents shaping their destiny. But he, Grimgut Daka Ma, had been touched by something older, something immense. He would endure, he would survive, and when the whispers returned, as they inevitably would, he would face them again. Because in the galaxy of endless war, only those who endure the impossible leave a mark. And now, Grimgut knew that mark would be his, and perhaps, in time, the mark of all orcs who dared to awaken. The silence of Gutsmasha was deceptive. Though the camp slept, the scars of war whispered beneath the dust and jagged rock. Grimgut sat alone atop a broken war machine, tusks glinting faintly in the dim red light, listening to the echoes of battles that had shaped the moon for millennia. Each explosion, each roar, each shattered skull carried a memory, a lesson encoded into the very stones of the world. And now, those echoes were layered over the memory of the green glow, of the ancient presence that had tested him, probing his mind and endurance. For the first time, Grimgut considered the weight of history. Orcs were not creatures of memory, they were creatures of action, of immediacy, of chaos. Yet here he was, reflecting on victories long past, on the ruin of machines, on the shattered remains of clans long gone. Each image, each echo of destruction, merged with the lingering pulse of the entity, creating a tapestry of brutality and cosmic awareness that few orcs could comprehend. He remembered the first time he had seen a warboss claim a horde, the crushing force of leadership imposed through fear and strength. He remembered the roar of engines, the smell of squigs burning, the rhythm of axes and choppas clashing in unison. And he remembered the moment he had stepped into the green light, confronted the incomprehensible, and survived. The universe had expanded for him in ways that should have been impossible. And now, the echoes of Gutsmasha's history, combined with this new awareness, burned in his mind like a drumbeat he could never ignore. A soft whisper reached him again, subtle yet distinct, threading through the air as if riding on the vibrations of his own heartbeat. It carried neither threat nor promise, only a reminder: the galaxy is patient, and the impossible waits for those who notice. Grimgut's tusks clenched. He had endured the trial, yet he knew instinctively that this was only the beginning. Others would come. Forces older, stranger, more dangerous than any orc had ever faced would notice his spark. And when they did, survival would require more than muscle, it would require cunning, endurance, and the fierce instinct that had carried him through the green glow. He glanced back at the camp. The orcs slept, their dreams filled with simple triumphs and immediate battles. They could not know the enormity of the trial he had faced, nor could they comprehend the subtle, terrifying beauty of the galaxy's hidden horrors. Grimgut, however, carried that knowledge like a weapon heavier than any choppa or shuta. It pressed against his mind, teasing him, shaping him, reminding him that awareness could be as dangerous as any enemy. The wind carried faint hints of distant battles, fires burning on moons far beyond, engines screaming across black skies, the clash of armies both familiar and alien. Each sound stirred something within him, resonating with the trial he had endured, echoing the rhythms of war and the pulse of existence. He felt both connected and alone, a brutal creature tethered to the galaxy by threads of chaos and understanding that few others could even perceive. Grimgut's grin returned, sharp and knowing. Fear had touched him, yes, but it had not broken him. The entity had tested him, the echoes of war had shaped him, and the galaxy had revealed a fraction of its endless depth. And yet, he knew he was only beginning to understand what it meant to survive the impossible. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, forces waited. Some would destroy, some would test, some would watch. And when they came, Grimgut would be ready, not just to smash, but to endure, to think, to survive. Because the galaxy does not yield to strength alone. It yields to those who face it without flinching, who accept the impossible, and who survive to tell the tale. And Grimgut Daka Ma, the brute who had stared into the green light, was now one such being. The night deepened, the red skies darkened further, and the whispers, soft, patient, eternal, lingered just beyond hearing. And Grimgut, restless and alive, lay in wait, listening, learning, preparing for the next impossible trial the galaxy would send his way. The first light of a distant sun crept over the horizon of Gutsmasha, painting the jagged landscape in shades of fire and blood. Grimgut Daka Ma stood atop a ridge, massive and imposing, tusks gleaming in the faint glow. The camp stirred behind him, orcs waking, bellowing, ready to fight and destroy as they always had, but Grimgut was already beyond them, beyond the ordinary chaos of the horde. He carried something no other orc had, the memory of the green light, the weight of the entity, and the knowledge that the galaxy was far older, stranger, and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. He breathed in the scorched air, filling his lungs with the smell of rust, ash, and distant fires. The whisper, the subtle pulse that had followed him through the ravine, lingered in the edges of his mind, a reminder that the trial was over but the universe was not done with him. The entity had tested him, measured him, and retreated, leaving him alive, changed, and sharper than any orc alive. Grimgut smiled, tusks flashing in defiance and satisfaction. He had endured, he had survived the impossible, and in surviving, he had learned something essential: strength alone was not enough. Bravery, cunning, and the willingness to face the unknowable were weapons just as deadly as any choppa or shuta. The camp erupted into noise behind him, orcs bickering, squigs squealing, engines igniting, but Grimgut did not turn back. He did not need to. He had faced something beyond the known universe, and nothing in the chaos of orc life could threaten what had been awakened inside him. He was no longer just a brute, no longer just a fighter. He was a survivor of the impossible, a creature of war and awareness, and a witness to secrets the galaxy had kept hidden for millennia. As he descended from the ridge, moving back toward his clan, a faint green shimmer flickered at the horizon, almost imperceptible, like the pulse of a star hidden behind smoke and shadow. Grimgut felt it, a quiet acknowledgement of the entity's presence, patient as ever. He did not fear it. He knew it would return one day, and when it did, he would be ready. For now, he was Grimgut Daka Ma, the same brute who smashed, who fought, who led, but changed, sharpened, and aware. And the whispers of the galaxy would follow him always, threading through the chaos, reminding him that the universe was vast, dangerous, and full of impossible challenges. He let out a roar, not of anger, not of fear, but of triumph. The sound carried across the red plains, shaking stones, rattling the remnants of war machines, and reminding every orc in the camp that their champion had faced the unknowable and survived. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of even the keenest orc senses, the entity lingered. Watching, waiting, patient, knowing that this was only the beginning. That Grimgut had endured, but the galaxy's whispers never die, and the impossible always returns. Grimgut smiled again, tusks bared, eyes gleaming with fire and curiosity. Sleep would come, eventually. But the galaxy, the trials, the whispers, they would not rest. And neither would he, because some orcs smash, some orcs led, and some orcs endure the impossible, and live to tell the tale. The end.